All right, so now that we've finished the first stage of individual ID, we can move on to the second. So as usual, we're going to click the launch button and then select the individual identification tab. Here, as usual, we're going to leave the batch size as the default and go straight to selecting our species of interest. So in this case, that's leopard. You'll have noticed when I switched over to leopard, you can see that the identification stage selector has become available for us to change. And that's because for leopards, we've finished the first stage, so the second stage is available to us. So we can go ahead and select the second stage called intercluster identification. You'll also notice that our algorithm selection has also disappeared, and that's because we already chose that in the first step and everything has already been processed with our chosen algorithm. So just as a quick recap, in the first stage, what we did was to look at each cluster in isolation and to use that context to be able to combine multiple view angles of each individual. And so the idea there was to hopefully combine as many view angles as possible and specifically to try and combine multiple flanks. So now what we can do is basically combine those little sets of images together based on how similar they are. So basically what we do is we get allocated an individual to work with, and then we just get a bunch of suggestions from most similar to least similar. And then we have three options. We can either accept, reject, or skip a suggestion. So accept will say that they are the same individual and take the images from the suggestion and combine them into our individual, making them one individual. If we reject the suggestion, we're saying outright that they are two different individuals. Don't show me their combination again. The last option, to skip a suggestion, is for when you're not sure. There's not enough information to make the call, and you would like to try and make that call at a later stage when there are more images associated with either individual to see if they're the same or not. So that's the core idea. The other part of it to keep in mind is that we deliver these potential matches on a quantile or percentile basis. So in other words, we start off by showing you the top 10% of pairs across the entire data set, not on a per individual basis. So you see the top 10%. Once you've completed those, we release the next 10%, then the next 20, then the next 30, and then the final 30. So the idea then is that you can work your way down and stop when you start noticing that the suggestions are poor. Or if you've got the time and resources to do so, you can go all the way down to a full exhaustive search where you've checked all possible combinations. But either way, you should have looked at as fewer combinations as possible, because by starting with those easy combinations, you're able to prevent yourself from sitting and comparing those easily matched individuals against all the other little random ones. You've just grouped them together very quickly and reduced your pool size from 1,000 images down to hopefully like less than 100 individuals that you can start exhaustively checking through, which are just significantly fewer combinations. The other thing that's worth pointing out as well is that the combinations that you skip are reintroduced into the pool after each quantile. So just with the idea that hopefully now you'll have enough context to be able to make those calls, and you can just continue skipping them as much as you want, or reject them when you finally, when you have enough information, or accept them if you have enough information to do so. So that's that. So we can now just go ahead and click launch, and you'll see that, as usual, the annotation task will start initializing. Okay, so there we go, it's now launched. So we can now go to the jobs page as usual. And then what's worth putting out here is that under the job type, you'll see what quantile you're currently working on. And we start off with the top 10% quantile, the top 10% of all pairs across the entire data set. So you'll see that change as you work through it. So as usual, simply click Take Job, and now we can see the interface. So again, you can see we've got two panels, like with the first stage of individual ID, but the difference is now there are two different sets of images. So in this case, the one on the left here is our currently allocated individual, and then on the right is a suggested match. Matches will be offered to you in order from most similar to least similar. So especially now in your top 10% quantile, you should have a very high percentage of matches, depending on your species and what have you. And then the platform will automatically show you the pair of images within those two individuals with a high similarity. But you do have the full set of images available of each of those individuals for context if you want them. And as before, your hotkeys are A and D for the left-hand panel and left and right for the right-hand panel. So you can page through some extra images for more context if you want, but hopefully the image it shows you should be the easiest to make that match or make that call. Some other things that are worth pointing out. So working out from the top here with the image distance. So that's the distance between the current pair of images we're looking at in meters in this case. Then you've got what we call the individual distance. So that's basically the shortest distance between the two areas covered by the individuals. And so the idea there is if you're looking at two individuals that are, or sets of images in this case really, that are covering two different neighboring areas, and you're looking at two cameras on the opposite ends of those areas, they might look like they're very, very far apart. However, these two individuals have actually sort of have an overlapping point or something like that. And that then allows us to actually much more easily see if they're how far apart these individuals are within our survey area to help us more easily determine how likely it is that they are the same individual. And then we also got the timestamp distance difference between the two current images. So in this case, 17 days and 23 hours, it's 18 days. So that's quite useful as well. Next, we've got the heat map. So you can switch that on with the hotkey H. And it'll just, there we go, need to load. And that basically shows you sort of the map of the matched key points from Hotspotter between these two individuals. So in this case, just based on the density alone, that's very likely to be a match, and I really recognize this individual. It's one we've dealt with before with the four rosettes and that sort of general shape around it, and the four spots there with the general shape around it. So I know it's a match. You also can tweak some of the other options here, just depending on your data, to sort of optimize it for you. So like, for instance, the radius thrown out by the points, we've obviously chosen them to be what we think is a good default, but you can obviously tweak that to what works for you. And then same with opacity. So obviously if you're struggling to see the heat map, you can turn it up, or you can turn down the opacity if you're struggling to see the spots underneath. And it'll obviously depend on the lighting in your image and what animal it is and stuff like that. But then yeah, essentially all you need to do is choose between your three options to either accept the suggestion, reject the suggestion, or skip the suggestion. So again, accept will combine the two individuals into one, and all the images will be grouped together. Reject is they're definitely not the same. You won't see any of those pairs between any of those images again. They're not the same individual. Skip will then simply say you're not certain, there's not enough information. You'll try again later, and those will get added back into the pool every time you finish a quantile, so that hopefully you have more information to make those calls. And then the other stuff's quite simple. Undo undoes your last action, and that's pretty self-explanatory. Next individual, that asks you to be allocated a new current individual. So if the one you've got you're struggling with for whatever reason, you can just ask for another individual there. Otherwise, you just have, in this case, 4 suggestions. You need to look at all 4 of your suggestions, and once you complete that, it'll then allocate you a new individual. And then lastly, unidentifiable marks the suggested match as unidentifiable. And so that's basically if you keep getting, you see an image that sort of you should have marked before as unidentifiable, but now you realize you really just can't do anything with it. You can mark it as unidentifiable, and it's the same as what happened before. And that applies to the suggested match side. So now we can just go ahead and annotate. So in this case, we know it's the same individual, so I can simply accept that. And now those images are combined. Now we see the next pair, it automatically switches to the two with the highest similarity. So again, I can see that pattern I recognize, so I can simply accept that suggestion. So now we're looking at the other side, which I don't know as well, but the unique spot pattern I look for is these 4 black spots, which are over there. It's the same individual, I can accept. There we go. There's our 4 rosettes with that general pattern. Same individual, accept. And you also notice now in the beginning we had 4 suggestions, and now we're up to 6. And so basically it's quite simple in that we only had 4 suggestions to look at for our initial set of images. But now, as we've added more images to this individual and it's grown, there's more potential matches that are in the top 10% quantile. So the number of potential matches now expands. This is a bit more difficult. Almost want to say that's not a match. The lighting is a bit difficult, so also your normal tools are available. So if you want to just tweak brightness and contrast, the same way as normal annotation, normal keys. Yeah, I'm expecting to see that 4 spot pattern over there, so sort of there, and I'm not seeing it. So to me, that looks like a false match. I mean, that's sort of also aided by the fact that you can see there's that match there is seemingly matched with a different part of the body there. So that to me seems to be a different individual. So I can then now say reject, and that now I can at a glance and immediately can see that's an old male. It's a false match. I can say reject. So now I've finished all suggestions for that individual. So as usual, we get a pop-up. Do we want to go back and make changes, or do we want to continue? So I'm happy with what I've done, so I'm going to say continue, and now I'll be allocated a new individual. And so that's essentially it. So now we've been allocated a male. So I need to now find out a nice, easy tell. This does look like a match. Yes, for me, that kind of there, to me that's a match, so I'll accept that. That looks like a lower density spot pattern or rosette pattern. So immediately that to me looks like a different individual, but obviously this is just for demonstration purposes. One other thing I've actually forgotten to cover at this point is that if you've got your set of images and you've got an image that doesn't look like it's meant to be there, it's a mistake. What you can do then is, and this is for both sides, you can right click anywhere in the box and there's the option there to dissociate. And what that is, dissociate that image from that individual and sort of puts it into its own individual by itself. And then you can still match it with everything else. So that's the other thing you can do. In this case, I think I'm just going to go ahead and reject that suggestion. Okay, I've just finished annotating, so I just want to show you something quickly. So basically, I get told that I'd finished with my individual as usual, and then once I accepted, and I've now completed the first quantile, I get this alert: the next individual is not available. So I say close. It'll take me back to the jobs page, and now you'll see that we've moved on to the top 20% quantile. And so basically the idea is to just sort of very much highlight that you're making that transition, just that you're aware that you've moved from one quantile into the next. So that you can then, as I've said before, you can then just annotate either completely down to the 100% or up to the 100% quantile, i.e. everything and exhaustive search, or you can stop, like I'm probably going to do now, is after the first 20% or quantile or something like that. Whatever sufficient for your purposes. And that's that.